The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on COVID-19 education. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. The Cabinet Secretary is joining us remotely. I now call on John Swinney for up to 10 minutes, please, Mr. Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to update Parliament on the phased reopening of schools and early learning and childcare settings in Scotland, set out in Scotland's route map through and out of the crisis. I would like to start by expressing my appreciation to all those within the Scottish education system for their commitment and efforts during this pandemic. Education staff have gone to great lengths to sustain learning and teaching and to support the well-being of young people and their families. Parents and carers have contributed significantly to the education of children at home since the lockdown began. I want to especially thank the children and young people of Scotland for their resilience during these difficult days and assure them that we are listening carefully to their concerns and hopes about how we plan a way ahead. We are again reminded that the children and young people of Scotland are a credit to our nation. Last week we published a strategic framework on the reopening of schools and early learning and childcare settings. This was developed by the Education Recovery Group, bringing together the Scottish Government, local authority partners, trade unions, parent representatives and other stakeholders. Collaborative working has allowed all stakeholders to share their knowledge and experience, building the widest possible agreement as we plan the way ahead. This framework is designed to achieve the safe reopening of schools and provides consistency and equity in a national approach for children and young people that is underpinned by local planning and delivery. A suite of supporting guidance will also be published to cover the practical issues that local authorities and learning settings must consider when developing local arrangements. This will include implementation measures, models of curriculum and assessment, well-being support and delivery of early learning and childcare. It will also include specific considerations for each sector based upon the health evidence relevant to age group. I have written to local authorities to ask them to now prepare local phasing delivery plans. There cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach to implementation given the different contexts in which individual local authorities and schools operate. Flexibility within clear and consistent national guidelines will provide an essential balance between equity and localism. Decisions made regarding the reopening of schools and ELC provision must be consistent with Scotland's framework for decision-making and the latest scientific advice. We will continue to be guided by the National Improvement Framework, our shared vision of excellence and equity for education in Scotland, getting it right for every child, and other legal requirements. I am aware that school closures are considered to have a negative effect on all aspects of children and young people's progress and development, as well as on their well-being. That is why we are working to enable as many children and young people as possible to return to education and care settings at the earliest date it is safe to do so. The scientific evidence and advice is an important part of that decision, alongside consideration of the other harms caused by ongoing restrictions. I'm therefore publishing today a summary of the scientific evidence which has informed our discussions and decisions to date. The evidence around coronavirus in general, and that relating to children in particular, is continuing to evolve. Some aspects are not yet well understood. The science cannot, in many cases, provide us with definitive conclusions. Our consideration of the scientific advice that we've received so far leads us towards taking a cautious approach. We will continue to monitor the evidence and advice and use it to inform decisions on further changes to restrictions. The research and evidence base is changing and growing quickly, and we will build in an appropriate mechanism and capacity to review our approach as it evolves. This will include learning from the experience of other countries, including in other parts of the United Kingdom, as they begin to open some of their education settings and children's services. I'm grateful to the COVID-19 Advisory Group and the work that they are doing to advise us on our strategy for reopening schools and early learning and childcare settings. The majority view of the Advisory Group is that it is necessary to consider actions to support physical distancing guidance in schools and situations where children are indoors for extended periods of time. It follows that almost all children and young people across Scotland will therefore experience a blend of in-school and in-home learning from the 11th of August 2020. This will bring benefits, including an earlier return to school for many, and the ability of all learners to engage with weekly in-home learning tasks. I anticipate that this will apply to all pupils except for those who are unable to attend because they are following the latest public health guidance. We will ensure that pupils in this category are catered for so there is no detriment to their learning experience. These safeguarding protocols will be kept under constant review, and time spent in school will be increased further as and when it is safe to do so, working towards full-time in-school learning for all. Education Scotland are providing nationally available learning materials both to support in-home learning and to augment and support schools' own arrangements. This includes consideration of children and young people with additional support needs and other families most in need of support. In-home learning takes many forms and is by no means all based online. I recognise that some pupils will need extra help, particularly with home access to technology. That is why the Scottish Government is working with local authorities and schools to identify families in need and are initially investing £9 million to provide 25,000 free laptops or tablets with internet access included if it is required. This is part of the first phase of our £30 million commitment to support digital learning outside school through the provision of appropriate devices. The phased return of pupils will need consideration of the emotional, physical and mental health and well-being of learners. School leaders will need time to work with the school community to explain local approaches and provide reassurance and support to learners and families. The implementation of physical distancing will impact upon the capacity for in-school learning within a specific setting. Initially, schools should assess the maximum number of pupils they can safely accommodate at any one time while maintaining a positive learning environment. We want to maximise the time children can spend with their teachers and their peers, so we're calling on local authorities to expand the size of the learning estate where possible. This could include community facilities or vacant office accommodation, subject to health and safety considerations and risk assessments. We're also working with the General Teaching Council for Scotland on plans to call on registered teachers who are not currently teaching or recently retired to consider returning to work to support children through the blended model of learning. Local authorities and schools should use these capacity assessments plus knowledge of their local circumstances to determine the optimum pattern of in-school attendance. In keeping with our belief in equity, it is right that they will also consider the needs of different groups of learners. Access to education and childcare for children of key workers will continue to be provided. There will remain an important role for assessment in supporting progression in learning during this phased return to schools. The Scottish Qualifications Authority will continue to develop plans to deliver the 2021 exam diet and will provide further advice to ensure that arrangements are in place to capture on an ongoing basis the learning outcomes met by young people in the senior phase in school year 2020-21. In early learning and childcare settings and for the youngest primary school children, it would not be desirable for children's well-being to implement strict physical distancing between young children or between a child and key worker. Alternative age-appropriate public health measures, building on expertise developed across Scotland in delivering critical childcare, will be put in place. Childminding services and outdoor nurseries will be able to reopen when we move into the first phase of our managed relaxation of lockdown restrictions. We are working with the childcare sector, the Care Inspectorate and public health advisors to prepare guidance in advance of their reopening. Other types of childcare provision will reopen over the summer. It may be that fewer children can be accommodated in each setting, and so capacity will be prioritised. The timetable for reopening services will take account of the lead-in time required to bring staff off furlough. The framework for ELC provision will safeguard the financial sustainability of services across all sectors. To ensure ongoing provision for key worker and vulnerable children, critical childcare will continue throughout June and the summer break. As recovery progresses, the use of childcare hubs may reduce as more children return to their familiar settings. In order to prepare for August, teachers and other school staff should return to schools in June when a decision is taken that it is safe to do so. Health and safety guidance, including risk assessments, must be in place prior to returning. I'm mindful of the impact of lockdown on many of our most vulnerable children. Local authorities have been asked to increase the numbers of children attending critical childcare provision. There will also be a focus on supporting children at key transition points, which may include some in-school experience in late June. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I look forward to working with all partners to continually monitor and review the support in place and ensure that children and young people's well-being and learning is prioritised in these challenging times. We have a mission to make this work, to educate Scotland's children and young people, and above all, to keep them safe. This approach, working with our teachers, school staff and local authorities, gives us a way to do that. We can safeguard our children's future and get them learning alongside their classmates again.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I intend to allow around 30 minutes for questions. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement and add my thanks to the teachers, parents and young people who find themselves in these most difficult of times in their academic lives. Of course, it's only right that schools do not open until they are safe to do so for both pupils and teachers, but every day out of school is another day lost from the full learning experience and another opportunity for the attainment gap to grow. So first of all, how set in stone is the August 11th date? If the scientific advice or the government's interpretation of that advice changes, is that date also likely to change? Because if schools remain closed for months, when they do reopen and only offer part-time attendance, the fundamental question on the minds of many parents will be how they can possibly return to work if their children are still at home. If our economy reopens and people are able to or find it necessary to return to work, the issue of childcare becomes the central barrier to doing so. So let me ask the Cabinet Secretary, does he have any expectation of how long this blended learning model might last? Are we talking weeks, months, or all of next academic year? If detailed guidance will be issued around changes to the restrictions which govern childminding and indoor nurseries, the majority of which are currently off limits to most parents, if the hubs for key workers will remain open throughout the summer to allow those workers to continue in their vital duties, and can he confirm finally that there are absolutely no plans to cancel next year's exam diet, as was unavoidably the case this academic year? Thank you.
John Swinney.
So there are a range of questions that Mr Green has posed there, and let me give some answers across all of them. My view is that the August 11th start date for the term is set in stone. I cannot see it being any earlier than that, and I think it's important to provide clarity to parents of that point. There is, of course, the risk that scientific advice indicates that even the 11th of August is not safe for us to reopen the schools, but I believe that the current direction of the scientific advice that's available to us contains a significant amount of confidence that we will be able to do so. In relation to the duration of the blended learning model, the blended learning model will continue for as long as we require it to operate, but not for a moment longer, because I recognise the importance of restoring full-time schooling for pupils as early as possible. My statement did make reference to the fact that if the scientific advice improves, then of course that enables us to move out of the blended learning model at the earliest possible opportunity. I recognise the challenges that are posed for parents in all of this, but Mr Green will notice from the government's route map that the other steps that the government is taking forward, particularly in relation to employment and the return to work, are predicated on the importance of ensuring that people work from home where they are able to do so. So the Economy Secretary and I are regularly discussing, and the Economy Secretary is discussing with employers' representatives, the importance of taking a pragmatic approach in relation to the working location of individual employees to enable us to tackle coronavirus. And there is obviously a knock-on effect there in relation to the education system into the bargain. Lastly, Mr Green asked me about the exam diet. The exam diet for 2021 is being planned just now. We obviously are uncertain about what the path of COVID will be in the course of the next 12 months. So the Scottish Qualifications Authority will give advice to schools about the importance of capturing evidence of the performance and the achievements of young people to ensure that that can be properly borne in mind in any certification process in 2021.
Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And let me also echo the Cabinet Secretary's recognition of the efforts of parents and carers, teachers and young people themselves during this period of school closure. Now, though, we need them to be confident that it will be as safe as possible to return as planned. The Cabinet Secretary has quite a challenge ahead of him. So let me ask about creating that confidence. The Cabinet Secretary acknowledged that the scientific advice and modelling is evolving and in some respects remains inconclusive. So will he promise to publish updated evidence as he has it in the coming weeks? Secondly, can he guarantee that all teachers in all schools will have access to an established test and support system in June when they are asked to return to school? And finally, can we be assured that government will provide all of the extra funding required by councils to reopen our schools safely, whatever that takes?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, earlier today I published the latest scientific advice that we have, and I hope that Mr Gray and parliamentary colleagues find that of assistance. I am committed to making sure there is openness around that information, and I will certainly publish further information as it comes to hand to ensure that we can have an effective and open and accessible debate about the scientific issues, because I fundamentally agree with Mr Gray that we can only reopen schools when it is safe to do so, and we can only do that when there is public confidence around the actions of so doing. So I will be happy to engage in discussion with members of Parliament, as I am with the Education Recovery Group, around the scientific advice that's available. And if members of Parliament, having had the opportunity to reflect on the material that I have published today, have any other specific requests for information or data or questions to pose, I will be very happy to engage in addressing those issues. Mr Gray will be aware from the announcements that the First Minister made today that the test, trace and isolate strategy that the government is bringing forward will be in place to be operational on the 1st of June, which will address the issues that he has raised with me about testing. And finally, on the issue of funding, the Scottish Government is in regular dialogue with local authorities around issues of funding, and the Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, takes forward these discussions and is fully cited on the issues and discussions we've had within the Education Recovery Group on these questions.
We'll move on to the open questions. I do have a lot of requests, and we have quite a lot of remote contributions as well, so if people could bear that in mind and try not to prolong their own contributions. Claire Adamson, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his statement, and I note his comments on the investment into digital and his mention of vulnerable and children in the statement. The barriers to vulnerable children and some additional support needs children accessing education are varied and complex. I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that pupils aren't excluded from engaging with the full curriculum during the phased reopening of the schools?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, one of the key priorities of the locally delivered approach that we have taken within the national framework that I've set out to Parliament today is to ensure that the needs of individual young people in their localities can be fully and adequately met. So our local authority partners will be looking very closely to ensure that the needs of individual young people, vulnerable young people and young people with additional support needs can be most effectively met through the blended learning model that we've taken forward. Now, where it is possible, given the local flexibility that is available, for young people to be more deeply engaged in formal schooling, then local authorities will take those opportunities to advance that approach, which is the benefit of local flexibility as we have put it into the framework. So I would reassure Claire Adamson of the focus very much on the interests of individual young people to make sure their needs can be most effectively met by their participation in the education system.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has now announced that it's having to spend 9 million so that 25,000 laptops can be provided to disadvantaged children to support home learning, but that's part of a total of 30 million which is allocated to this. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell me whether 25,000 laptops will be enough to cover all disadvantaged children, or whether some will miss out during phase 1 of this scheme? Can you confirm that these laptops will be with the children by the 11th of August when schools go back? And if 25,000 laptops represent £9 million of spend, what is the remainder of the £30 million earmarked for?
John Swinney.
This is an issue of active discussion with local authorities. The 25,000 laptops have been ordered, and we await delivery of those laptops to make provision available for young people. But as we take that forward, we'll be in discussion with local authorities, because fundamentally this has to be a locally driven set of decisions about who actually requires to be supported with individual technology. So we will take forward these discussions with local authorities. That will have a heavy influence on our discussions about what the further resources that have not yet been the subject of final allocation are spent upon, because fundamentally we want to make sure that the technology is able to reach the young people who require it, and for that we need to have an effective partnership with local authorities to enable that to be delivered on the ground.
Neil Bibby, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Deputy First Minister, many parents made sacrifices in order to afford to send their children on school trips this term. Many low-income families will have put themselves into debt. These trips have now been cancelled due to the COVID-19 restrictions, but some providers are trying to get schools to rebook for next year rather than provide refunds. Can I ask that the Scottish Government use its power and influence and to work with COSLA to ensure that every family is immediately fully refunded full value of what they have paid? And can I also ask that if any travel companies refuse to cooperate, that the Scottish Government and COSLA circulate a list of those companies to every school in Scotland?
John Swinney.
President Officer, I recognise the seriousness of the issue that Mr Bibby raises, and I will give him the undertaking today that we will pursue that issue with our local authority colleagues. There will be, I'm conscious of the fact that many families will, as Mr Bibby rightly suggests, have made significant financial sacrifices to make sure that young people are able to participate in these trips. The families in making those sacrifices, and they will be making other sacrifices, I am sure, during this pandemic, puts significant strain on families. So I give them the commitment that we will explore that issue with COSLA, and if there is a need for us, which I hope there is not, to publish any information about a lack of cooperation, then I will certainly give consideration to doing exactly that.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. Given the difficulties for parents who are working if their children are at home, will this mean that children of people in work are more likely to be expected to attend school than the children of parents who are not? And what level of viral spread will be considered low enough to allow children to attend school as normal and end blended education?
John Swinney.
On Mr Gibson's first point, there has to be equity of access to education for young people. It's one of the fundamental principles of Scottish education. So young people must be able to gain access to education services on an equitable basis. It's for that reason that we are putting in place the support that some young people may actually require to enable them to have that access through a lack of digital connectivity. In relation to the second point that Mr Gibson raises, and I recognise the significance of this point, we have to take great care in making judgments around the scientific advice and evidence that is available to us. All of our judgments as a government are designed to ensure that we are taking no actions that fuel coronavirus within our society, and take every action we can to try to suppress its effect. Therefore, the plans to resume education in the fashion that I've set out are consistent with those aspirations. And as we see progress being made, I hope to be in a position that we can move away from the blended learning model and into the traditional full formal schooling model. But that will be dependent upon seeing further reductions in the key indicators that the First Minister set out in her statement on Thursday, which are about the reproduction number, about number of admissions to ICU, the number of fatalities that have taken place, and the number of cases that have been diagnosed. And of course, the testing strategy that the First Minister announced at lunchtime today will also provide us with a significant amount of information to determine the progress of coronavirus, which will then influence our thinking. I suppose finally I should say that there is an emerging evidence base around the transmissibility of COVID amongst young people, and that will have a bearing on our thinking as well.
Ross Greer, followed by Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you. Young people are set to spend less time in school than at any point in modern history this coming term from August, which the Deputy First Minister acknowledges is to their detriment. So to have them sit exams at the end of this will only compound inequalities which reduced schooling brings, particularly for those already disadvantaged by poverty. So why have the government and the SQA not considered DIS's calls for National 5 and higher exams next year to be scrapped and replaced by a system of continuous assessment which can be planned for ahead of schools reopening in August?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, there's a general view within Scottish education of the importance of us having reliable and certificated qualifications for all as part of the way in which we deliver education. So the exam diet represents a significant part of that process. But what my statement acknowledged, and I've acknowledged this in my answer to Jamie Green as well, is that while the exam diet is planned for in 2021, we cannot be certain that it will be able to take its course. So the SQA will take forward and deliver guidance to schools on the way in which we capture evidence of the performance of young people to make sure that can be as influential on the certification process that it may need to be in the spring of 2021. So that guidance will be available to schools before the start of the term in August, and it will be there as a significant element of what teachers can gather as evidence of the performance and the attainment of young people, which will be critical in assessing their performance in 2021.
Jeremy Balfour, followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if I can return to a point made by Mr Gibson, and that is in regard to teachers who have children who are at school as well. Will teachers whose children are still at school be allowed to go to school full time every week, or how will they be expected to teach week in, week out if they have childcare problems as well?
John Swinney.
So this is one of the issues that gets into the area where local discretion and local planning is the most appropriate level at which these judgments should be made. There will be a multiplicity of issues that will affect the availability of the teaching population once schools return. There will be some teachers who, for health reasons, given the prevalence of COVID, may not be able to present for teaching purposes. There will be other issues such as the ones raised by Mr Balfour. So local decision making within the strategic framework that the government has put in place by the dialogue we've had with the Education Recovery Group is critical in coming to judgments about many of these questions. And local authorities and schools will be best placed to undertake their workforce planning with that degree of flexibility at their hand.
Bob Doris, followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the support and offer from the Scottish Government to provide laptops and broadband for young people required to support blended learning. This will be crucial. Cabinet Secretary, many young people in my constituency also attend our excellent further education colleges. Student representatives from Glasgow Kelvin College told me many FE students depend on college IT and don't have laptops or broadband at home either. Will the support announcement be open to those students also?
John Swinney.
So that's one of the issues that we are considering in relation to the other resources that are available to us that I talked about earlier on. So we will look very actively at the position of further education students to determine whether there are appropriate arrangements we can put in place with colleges to deliver such support where it is necessary to be taken forward. It's important that all elements of the education system are able to take steps forward after this period of disruption. I'm committed to making sure that that is the case, and we'll work with the further education sector to enable that to be the case.
Beatrice Wishart, followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's teachers already work long hours at the best of times. So how is the balance of blended learning going to work between the demands of teaching children in the classroom while having others learning from home? Is this one of the reasons why the government is looking at hiring extra teachers? And how many extra teachers does the Cabinet Secretary think might be needed? And how many might be available according to the GTCS lists?
John Swinney.
Officer, the judgment on the need for local teachers to supplement the existing workforce will be a decision very much arrived at local authority level, where, as I've indicated a number of times, the framework that I've put in place provides sufficient flexibility for local authorities to make these judgments and come to these decisions. There are obviously a number of teachers who are active who are registered with the General Teaching Council but are not actively teaching. The General Teaching Council will be contacting those teachers to establish the opportunities that exist for them to contribute and participate in formal education, should they wish to do so. And obviously, that will be of assistance in providing the necessary skills and capacity that is required. One of the important questions that local authorities and schools have to wrestle with is the way in which the delivery of this model can be most effectively put in place at local level. And some circumstances will vary very significantly. Beatrice Wishart's constituency, the composition of the school estate is dramatically different to the school estate from the previous question of Mr Doris. So there will be a great diversity in that provision, and it's important that local authorities look actively at how those arrangements can be put in place at local level to ensure that the needs of young people are met effectively. I should finally add that Education Scotland is providing additional nationally based support and materials to assist schools in ensuring that the blended learning model is maintained and supported actively at local level.
Daniel Johnson, followed by Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In Edinburgh Southern, there are 4 schools with school rolls above capacity and a further 4 that have school rolls above 95%. So even with blended learning, it's going to be extremely difficult to implement social distancing without the use of additional space, which will obviously incur costs. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what assistance, both practical and financial, will the Scottish Government extend to local authorities with significantly high levels of high school rolls?
John Swinney.
These are issues that we have committed to discuss with local authorities. The Finance Secretary has cited on these the discussions that have been agreed to take forward. We will look at any issues that arise of that nature. But what I would say to Mr Johnson is that the framework that we've put in place provides the maximum amount of flexibility to local authorities to design arrangements that meet the needs of children and young people in a diverse range of educational settings. And I would encourage local authorities to take forward that consideration to enable us to come to conclusions about the most appropriate delivery of education in the different circumstances that we now face.
Christine Graham, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, I'm referring to the local phasing delivery plan. In my rural constituency, there's a key role for local bus companies transporting pupils to school. Given that I think we're looking at part schooling, possibly shifts, what discussions has the Cabinet Secretary had with his colleague, the Transport Secretary, to ensure buses can operate, as it were, also a shift service, observing social distancing, which would involve additional journeys and may need additional funding?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, in one of the answers that Mr Matheson gave earlier on this afternoon, he indicated that he and I are in active discussion around the whole issue of school transport and the interrelationship of the school transport issue with some of the wider issues that the Transport Secretary wrestles with in relation to the support for the bus industry and the way in which the bus industry operates around the country. So the questions of physical distancing are as relevant on school transport as they are within the school estate. So those issues will be actively discussed at local level. They will be quite challenging issues to resolve, particularly in rural areas that Christine Graham represents, and very much significant issues in the areas that I represent in Perthshire as well. So I assure Christine Graham that these issues are very much at the heart of the discussions. And as I indicated in my statement, there are a number of practical elements of the arrangements which will vary from different area to different area within the country, where we need to make sure there is the appropriate opportunity for local flexibility to deploy where it is necessary to do so.
Brian Whittle, followed by Gail Ross.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I remind the Chamber that my eldest daughter is a secondary school teacher? Cabinet Secretary, you will be aware of many teachers raising the issue of losing contact with some of our most vulnerable pupils during this time, and they are struggling to maintain a contact protocol that protects the pupils' welfare. So can I ask Cabinet Secretary can tell the Chamber what the measures the Scottish Government can put in place to protect our most vulnerable pupils during this crisis?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, one of the steps that I took during the crisis was to discuss with local authorities the need to maintain contact with some of the most vulnerable young people within our society. And that essentially takes two elements. First of all, there is those children and young people who are within our child protection system. And on the most recent data that I saw, over 90% of those young people had been contacted by local authorities and local authority staff within the last 7 days. And that picture has been broadly consistent throughout the pandemic. And I pay tribute to local authorities for the effectiveness of that contact. But the other element is the work that is underway within individual schools to maintain contact with young people. And I've taken part in a number of events with schools over the last few weeks, remotely, I might add. One of the points that we have been discussing has been the fact that schools have demonstrated in the course of this pandemic that you don't need to be occupying a building to retain your school community. And I think schools have very successfully reached out where they've not been able to be within the buildings and the infrastructure of their school to maintain their school community by the connections that exist between staff and pupils and their families. And I can think of one example where I was in touch with a school in my own constituency just last week through a parent council discussion, and the volume and the quality of teacher and pupil engagement was very high indeed. Indeed, I heard of other cases from Christine Graham's constituency as well in the course of the last 7 days. And I think on a sustained basis, teachers are maintaining contact with pupils. It is harder to do so, but I think where there are good, strong relationships between teachers and families, that is bearing fruit in the context of the current pandemic. And Scottish education is the better for having that strength in its foundations.
Gail Ross, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and good afternoon, Deputy First Minister. Can I also add my thanks to teachers and staff for keeping everything going at the moment. My question is about practical subjects, and when the schools return, how equipment, kit and instruments are going to be used in a hygienic manner. Will teachers be responsible for cleaning and sterilising everything? Will schools need to employ extra cleaners? And do you think that there will be a need for additional equipment to be purchased?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, there will without doubt need to be very effective hygiene measures in place in schools when the schools return in August. Well, they'll have to be in place before any members of staff return in June into the bargain. So local authorities are now, in response to the letter that I have issued, inviting local authorities to develop delivery plans for the resumption of formal schooling. Will now have to give consideration to the very substantial issues that Gail Ross raises, because they will be integral to our efforts to ensure that there is no diminution of our efforts to tackle coronavirus as a consequence of the reopening of schools. So the cleaning of the school estate and of equipment and the maintenance of that strong, clean regime will be critical as part of the resumption of school education in Scotland.
I have 3 questions left, and to let the Chamber know I'm minded to take them. We'll be a couple of minutes over 5 o'clock. Colin Smith, followed by Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There's a strong emphasis in the Cabinet Secretary's statement on blended learning, therefore homeschooling. In families where parents work often all day, full time to make ends meet, their children will be in school part of the day, but childcare the rest of the day. So can the Cabinet Secretary say if there will be any changes in how that childcare will be delivered, in effect, to help provide what would be the homeschooling element? Otherwise, it is difficult to see how that could be delivered in many households. And will those parents have to pay for childcare if it's being delivered during what would have been the normal school day?
John Swinney.
There are a number of very complex questions that Mr Smith raises, and it's impossible to give a general answer to all of them. I would say that the approach to blended learning will require a degree of pragmatism amongst employers, which is commensurate with the route map that the First Minister set out last Thursday, which envisages fundamentally that home working will continue for many, many people as a consequence of the pandemic. So the discussions that I have with the Economy Secretary and which the Economy Secretary has with the business community are critical to creating a shared understanding of how the blended learning model can work, and also individuals can return to employment and active employment as effectively as they possibly can do in different settings around the country.
The final 2 questions are from Mark MacDonald, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I spoke to the Cabinet Secretary in one of his recent statements about the issues around transitions, particularly for children with additional support needs who may be transitioning from nursery to primary, or as is the case for my own son, from primary to secondary, and the potential for there to be some special measures required in relation to that. Given that we now have the August 11th start date and the probability of blended learning, what further thought has he given to the impact on children with additional support needs and what special measures might be required in relation to them?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the route map that was published last week envisages transition support opportunities being available for pupils leaving primary 7 to enter S1. And my statement today has given express account of the importance of ensuring that we meet the needs of young people with additional support needs. So it's crucial that at local level, the opportunities for transition, which we would envisage taking place before the summer break at the end of June, are able to be taken forward, and that specific account is made of the needs of young people with additional support needs to manage and to support their transition into the next stage of their schooling. So the framework envisages that being taken forward in a sustained way to meet the needs of children and young people with diverse and different needs around the country.
And Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the concerns raised by teaching unions in England about the reopening of schools there this coming Monday and the risks they fear this may involve. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore provide people in Scotland with some reassurance that he has engaged with our unions as well as local authorities and crucially, of course, parents, that their views have been heard and that health and safety is at the forefront of any decisions taken and to be taken ahead of the phased reopening of schools in Scotland?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, my objective throughout the whole discussion, which I appreciate is a challenging discussion about the resumption of formal schooling, has been to work in a manner that creates maximum agreement and unity around the reopening of formal schooling within Scotland. The Education Recovery Group has brought together the Scottish Government with our local authority partners in joint leadership of that work, working closely with the professional associations, the teaching trade unions, with educational stakeholders and also with the National Parent Forum of Scotland. And the proposals that were announced on Thursday were endorsed by all of the partners involved. I should also say that the union Unison was also involved in those discussions, recognising that staff in our schools are not only teachers, but there are many other critical staff whose interests are represented by the union Unison. And we got to a point of agreement. I very much welcome the endorsement of the approach that we are taking, which has been around looking at the evidence, making a judgment about the safety of the decisions that we take to ensure that we do nothing that jeopardises the safety of pupils or staff, and that we do everything to contribute as an education community tackling coronavirus. So Annabel Ewing has my absolute assurance that that is the manner in which we've embarked on this exercise, and it's the manner in which we will take that exercise forward in the period to come.
That concludes questions on the statement by John Swinney on COVID-19 education. And as there are no questions to be put as a result of today's business, this meeting is closed.